So I'm Rachel DeBlauder. My pronouns that I prefer are she and her. I'm a content strategist at New City, which is a digital strategy and design agency. That's based in Blacksburg, Virginia, but I live in Manassas, Virginia, which is about 40 minutes outside of DC. I have a background working in higher education. I worked in marketing communications at Virginia Tech before I started at New City. So hello to any Hokies that might be out there. So at New City, I've been working there since 2012, and I've helped with, I counted up the other day, and it was more than 30 higher ed and healthcare organizations that were working on a redesign, some in WordPress, some in Drupal, some in third-party implementations. But for the last few years, most of those redesigns have been switching those organizations from a page-based template CMS system to a design system format, and that was included a modular pattern library that's accessible to the CMS authors. So the benefits are pretty well documented from the development and the design perspectives, but we've noticed in our work a few common challenges for writers, faculty, and administrators, all the people who create the content that goes into the system. So the system, the back-end users, and the people who make the content that's outside of it and gets into it somehow. So we wanted to share some things that we've learned to help. And the things I wanted to go through today are just a little bit about what is a pattern library, just to explain the difference, because there's a lot of terminology stuff around that right now. How they affect the authoring process, and some of the things that we've seen people come up with migrating that content in, and some of the things you can do to prepare your team for making that switch. So I mean to leave some time for questions at the end. So please, if you think of anything, use that form at the bottom of the page. And also, it sounds like it gets you cool chances at prizes too. So anything I don't get to, I'll try and answer afterwards. So please do leave questions. So the design systems and pattern libraries that we work with tend to use atomic design. And what that is just an organization method for design systems, if you didn't know. It was devised by Brad Frost, a web developer and author, in 2013, and today is apparently his birthday. If you check his Twitter, he had asked for people to post the funniest things they've seen, so there's some good stuff on there today. But yeah, so atomic design uses that chemistry metaphor of atoms, molecules, organisms, to establish hierarchy and show how those discrete pieces fit together to create larger and more complex organisms, both in the real world and then in our case into larger things like templates and pages. So these are some examples of atoms on the top there that you can combine, fonts, buttons, text styles, link styles. Combining those together in a structure can turn it into a molecule. Combining a few molecules together can be put together to form an organism. And so you're using these pieces that can stand alone by themselves and be really consistent, but also become highly specified interaction design elements that are designed to elicit a particular behavior from a user or understanding. So instead of a structured page templated site, this is an example of one that we worked with. A client that we worked with, the Smithsonian Mason School of Conservation, is a Smithsonian Institution and George Mason University collaboration. They were coming from a structured page templated site where the only thing the authors could control is the one big WYSIWYG region, the what you see is what you get box you type in, where the style choices are mostly just bold, italic, sometimes inline images like you see here, and some links. And it's really just kind of limited in terms of where stuff goes and what the authors themselves can do with it without a developer. And so a complete pattern library, like this one for the Oklahoma State University that we worked on, this is just an example of some of their patterns all over the page that it's a complete set. It can drive a whole range of user behaviors. So routing elements, featuring, things designed to educate or promote, messaging pieces, little bits of context and persuasion that are designed to bring that out in users as well as communicate it from the author's perspective. So it essentially atomic design essentially breaks down the functional unit of web design from that page level into those individual interactive components that are meant to bring out specific engagement behaviors. And so for UX and design and dev teams, they can focus on building those little individual components of the web pages first, and they can test them for responsive web design, accessibility, compliance, and usability across a bunch of different browser environments. So authors can use them in all kinds of communication situations that fit their content, and then really just design a flow down the page, like you can see there. But that has a few things that have changed. That changes a few things for CMS users. In a WYSIWYG or template-based CMS, where there's really just one big box on the page to fill, in that case, the developer usually makes the templates. The author just fills in the blanks. It's not very flexible for people who can't code or don't have access to that code. And then it's not really optimized for responsive in terms of the pieces on the page as much, because usually the page is one big empty box. So if I wanted to give users two to three main links to choose from in this blog post on the end here, I wouldn't have any pieces designed to do that necessarily without being able to inject some HTML in there. Or if I wanted to call out something important like a deadline, my only options in this case would be paragraph breaks, bold heading styles, and stuff like that. And that's pretty common that we see where people are coming out of the systems. And then a lot of times they're moving into a system that a CMS with a pattern library where the author can control the layout from inside the CMS. That layout can be really shaped a lot around the content, and it requires some different skills for content authors. So while you might be intimately familiar with some advanced interfaces for page building, for some of those authors, whether they're used to the old style and they used to update their own pages, or maybe they need to get into a new system and they've never dealt with one, when they're switching to a pattern library-based site, there's often some common they're overwhelmed by the amount of choices, and we tend to see that pretty much. Like this is an ACF implementation where the choices are stepped like a decision tree. So you choose your grid layout here before you select the subcomponents to nest inside of it, like these. And so this means that CMS users have to be familiar with the terms in all this new toolbox. They have to have some kind of mental model for what those things will look like when they're deciding which ones to choose to put their content in. So even in this case, we had slab and quotation marks shows we weren't really, we weren't even sure what we should be calling that one. So you can get into some terminology and some vocabulary difficulties as well. But the trade-off is that you get more powerful layout tools that are better suited to the content you have, and they provide a better user experience, but it also introduces some new rules that authors have to get used to when they need to create something that's got a lot of complex elements and flows on a page. To get used to those, it means they need to get familiar with what patterns are called, that vocabulary, how each of them work, and when to use them is usually one of the things that we find they struggle with the most. So it brings up a new need for usability knowledge and for layout design skills that many CMS users weren't trained for and don't have experience with. A lot of places do pass it off to a specialist, but a lot of places don't as well. So a lot of new stuff comes up that people need to learn how to do for CMS users. And then for the writers themselves, a lot of content doesn't come just from the people who are entering it. A lot of it comes from staff members, administrators, faculty members, that gets emailed and disseminated to the people who need to upload it. So what does it mean for those people who are even further outside the system? So structured formats they're not a new thing in writing. It's for professional writers, things like press releases or academic journals with their abstract section and their methods and their results and discussion. They're used to those following that structure and that flow that's consistent. That helps meet the users or the readers' expectations, and it helps the readers glean that info quickly, and so they know what to expect where, and they can find the meaning, they extract the meaning out of the words more than in a non-structured environment where they're not sure what to expect. So a pattern library just does the same thing as that. It breaks the content into structured chunks that are based on the purpose of that piece, that interactive element, and the audience expectations. So things like routing blocks, lets people know, hey, these are choices that are of the same level. So pick one of these, or things that look promotional, like a story. It tells them what to expect when they click on that link. So for authors, that means they have to rethink how they're thinking about the text and how items flow together on the page. It's not a blank slate anymore. That's a big white box to type into, but it's an intentionally crafted interactive experience that it evokes the same user comprehension and interactions across multiple device environments. So it's a lot to think about, and it's a big change for the people putting it together. So this is a slide from earlier from the Smithsonian Mason School of Conservation. They have content creators who they now have to be able to see the pattern pieces that are hiding inside those walls of text that you might get from your dean or your administrator, faculty. So in this case, there's a CTA button. There's a application link in the top that's really important, and it stands alone by itself. It's at the top of the page here, but it's something that there's an opportunity to show that better, to use a display pattern that will help. And the same thing, this page has 3 courses where it talks about these are the 3 courses that you have to choose from for this undergraduate level academics programs. So somebody migrating this page over would need to be able to see all of these things in order to get it to something like this. So this is the same thing where we've got the CTA at the top to that apply button, and then we've got those 3 courses designed in a routing format. So the text had to change a little bit to get into this format, but it communicates the same messages more effectively with the help of those pattern pieces. So in this case, the layout itself becomes a tool for writers to use, but they need to be able to see that, or at least mentally to see it, to have a mental model of what those pieces are in order to craft their text. It's moving away from that prose writing idea that we all tend to think of it as, and then toward configuring an effective interactive experience. Just a different way to think about it. So we've seen some problems that are pretty common from migrating existing content. Sometimes content that was just fine before, and everyone says, yep, this is good to go. It's good to move over to the new site. It won't necessarily fit into the new patterns. This can be especially difficult for pages that have a mix of routing purposes and informational content. So like this academic page for Davidson College, it's got a lot of, we want to drive users to those academic programs. And so there's a couple of main things to send people to, but it won't necessarily fit straight into the new patterns just as it stands. So inserting those new pattern pieces that are specifically designed to encourage routing behaviors, especially, that can create havoc kind of for long form paragraph content. It makes the pages really long, which is not the main problem. It's more, it's just not designed to fit in the same way. So we have to kind of manage people's expectations around that. Text that can look harmless in a text editing program. This is a screenshot from Gather Content that we use a lot. Something that these look like we did a really careful job making the word counts the same in the headers, but sometimes things like a long word. This was just a mock-up, so that the text is different underneath it. But the headers, it shows some of those long words that you can't change can have a really a big impact in the pattern that you had in mind. So thinking about things like how do I make columns line up is not necessarily something that people who are usually delivering the text have in mind. So that's something, a layout consideration that is a new thing for people. And then the same thing, this is a pattern from Oklahoma State University. For images, they can look different at desktop or tablet or mobile. So you have to take into account what a series of teasers might look like. Something that you might be able to put 3 in a row on a page at desktop size. At mobile size, it might look like a barrier to scrolling, and it might make people think the page has ended. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're choosing those patterns to decide what it's going to look like in both of those instances, and sometimes also at tablet too. Tablet can be sneaky because a lot of times the first portrait on a tablet size that's held portrait, a lot of times that image where it starts to stack at that mobile breakpoint, a lot of times that image is bigger than it is on the desktop size. So authors or people who are used to giving photos for a desktop site that doesn't have as many individually moving around responsive pieces, they might have to think about different ways to resize or different aspect ratios that they hadn't before. And then I just wanted to go through a story of myself doing it. So everybody has a learning curve when they get into a new pattern system, including us and me in ones that I helped design even. So I just wanted to walk through some trial and error that I recently made on a contact page that I thought was pretty simple that I was placing for that Smithsonian Mason school. And as a disclaimer, I am trained as a writer, so I have no design experience. But a lot of times the people that are in the CMS are also trained as writers. So this is just sort of to give an idea of what they might be going through. So in my first attempt, I was trying way too hard to use the fancy new styles. What seemed a good idea in the blank fields on the back end of the entry form were out of balance when I looked at the page. So in this case, the social media was a new thing they wanted to add to this page because they were taking it out of the menu bar. So I was like, oh, a photo teaser will look great right here. And it turned the least important thing on the page to the most important. So that had to go. I moved that call out over to the sidebar as non-essential info. And then I had the there's 3 ways to contact people. And I tried to delineate that was the choice, that those were a choice between the 3 with some call out boxes that totally didn't work. So now the most important info is the biggest on the page, but it's not easy to scan and it's just doesn't really fit the type of content that you need. So you have content hierarchy issues. Also with the mailing address up top, because on a website, the mailing address isn't usually the most important thing or the thing that most people would be looking at on a content page. So it's too heavy and not quite organized correctly. So I flipped it. The mailing address is now at the bottom. It's still too heavy for that least important info. And I tried adding some bullets to make the 3 choices stand out, but that was really a misuse of that style. So I need to pull that out. And now the sidebar is too long. It's a lot lower, which we can find on these short pages we can have trouble with depending on how many links there are in your navigation or what kinds of things you want to add in the sidebar. These are things that authors don't always think about. And so killing those bullets and adding header styles of the contact info took up some more vertical space, and it balanced out that sidebar. But now the copy looks really weird and shouty because of those H2 styles. And the mailing info is still unnecessarily green and prominent, but I did line up the bottom there, so that that helped. So I ended up killing the green callout box that wasn't serving me, and then I added the contact info for a new H2 at the top, just to separately kind of define those 2 areas of the page. Here's the 3 different places you can call, and here's the mailing info to give those equal weight, and also it helps bring down the shoutiness of those 3, and it also meets the WCAG compliance for keeping your header levels in order, hierarchy. And then I also got a developer. I asked the question and said, hey, can I get some help hiding this navigation menu? It was redundant. You can see the links in it are the same as the links that are in the top navigation bar because this page was at root level. So we got a checkbox that authors can now use to add it in there. We can set it by permissions level so that not everybody has access to it, but it's an option for pages like this where it's just a struggle and it's not really doing a good job showing the navigation of those places. So 5 attempts later, I had placed a really deceptively simple contact page that only had about 50 words that didn't change. So that, and what we thought would be a 5-minute, move over exercise took a little bit longer. And that's for somebody that works in these systems all the time. So to somebody with no experience that's making these sort of decisions, it can be really overwhelming. And we want to help them manage their expectations and let them know that that's okay. You're going to have to try things, and you're going to have to replace, and you're going to have to publish and look or save as draft and look, and then go back and change things around. And it also means that we need to plan plenty of time for migration, because a lot of times people don't expect that. They're thinking about their WYSIWYG boxes in their old system. They're thinking about plopping it into the new system, and they think, that's only going to take as long as copy, paste, and then save. And it's not necessarily true. So the idea is to recognize that this format of change to a pattern library system, it requires some different skills for those content contributors they don't usually have training for these types of things. So writing to fit, like you do in a print publication, it's not necessarily a skill that web content contributors have. Prioritizing the items that are on a page, especially when you start thinking about mobile and how things are going to lay out in the different viewport sizes. Thinking about what the users want to know. A lot of times when it's just a WYSIWYG, you can think about the text as just the side that you want to present, but it's less, when you start putting it in those pieces that are designed to be interactive, you have to start thinking more about what do the users want? What is the word they're looking for? What should this button say? So you really have to start flipping it over and thinking about what the user wants more. And then just letting go of that pixel perfect, that rubber stamped text that's approved by the dean kind of idea. That you have to have a little bit of flexibility in the layout, or it's just not going to get optimized. Sometimes you have to, do things like cut those columns or change the headers on things or add a different header. And you need to make sure that people have the authority and the autonomy to do that. And then really just thinking of a page as a single step in a whole web of dependencies, that it's really just contributing to creating a full user experience across the whole website. It's no longer a document that is published on its own. It's now just a piece that has maybe a couple buttons or a couple of routing choices that's on the way to something else in the user journey. So there's a couple of things that we do that we found helps people when they need to make the switch. We're thinking of content is about text right now, but then it's really about the people. So it's starting to get people to think through away from just the pages of content or content as pages, and starting to think of the people behind them, the processes behind them, and some of the standards that they have to meet as well. And that's all new stuff for a lot of universities and colleges. So identifying those key pages is really the place to start. You're not going to need to do these processes with everything on your site, but there are going to be some that you really have to take a close look at, and people are going to need help with, whether they belong to someone specific or multiple groups, or you have all the autonomy of your own website, which would be nice. So thinking about to find these pages, it's usually the ones that have user goals and internal goals in the same spot. So things that mix those. These are the things that the user is looking for, and these are the things that we want to say to them. We want them to understand this about us. So those are usually the top level pages on your site. Finding those people who care about that content. They might be the owners of it or the creators of it, but they might have some kind of stake in it. They're stakeholders, and then just also finding out how they feel. If you identify the pages and you find out who you need to bring around the table, but you don't find out that these people feel left out or these people have changes in mind for a specific page, then you might have some kind of like an iceberg under the ocean type of situations where there's a lot of feelings about content, and you need to uncover those in the first step is one of the things that we found. So a lot of times these pages, these key pages on your site to focus on will be the academic program pages, which are like your product pages, but also those less glamorous user tasks like financial aid, housing, career info, and admissions procedures. Those are the ones where something the user cares about a lot is in there. Those prospective students are looking for the answers to those questions and trying to, fill out forms and do those tasks. So it's not always the most glamorous pages that everybody thinks about when they're thinking about a redesign. The homepage and the about page might be gorgeous, but the undergraduate students, the FAFSA page might be the one that's going to get the most usability points out of a redesign. So pages you don't probably need to worry about are more like the ones like news, directory profiles, and those destination pages that are sort of individual scholarship descriptions or course descriptions or things that the text won't change, and there's probably not a lot of routing pieces that need to go into it or promotional pieces that need to link people over to a related news story or something like that. So after you've identified the most important ones to focus on, the next step is to take a look at them one by one and really just analyze the goals of those few pages. Usually there's we try to work with about 8 or 10 on a site to really get the top user goals covered. So thinking about them in terms of what's the purpose, what's it doing on the site, what's its job to do, what do users want to do on this page. They might be thinking of something that we're not ready to give them yet, or vice versa. They might be not have something in mind that we want them to do up front. So thinking about what context they have along their journey, what do they know already, and what do they need to know before they're ready to do the thing that we want them to do, and where should that be? It's important in this step to think about what a page's content should be doing, what that content should ideally be, not just what's written on the page now. So in this example is for the Emory School of Medicine we worked with. It's just a page I marked up to say, like, okay, here's the stuff we want to reorganize and keep and bring forward and maybe pull out into some different pieces. But there's also might be stuff that's not here that we know needs to go on it. And that's a good time to talk to stakeholders and see what they've been keeping in mind. One exercise that we use to do this is called core model exercise. It's an exercise developed by Odin Rundberg. He's a content strategy consultant at NetLife Research in Norway. He did a Gather Content webinar several years back that we have used this exercise tons with people that we're working with organizations. So this is one we do with content production teams and subject matter experts to really help them think through those internal goals. It's not just for writers, it's really for people who care about what goes on the page and know about the stuff that needs to go on the page. So it helps them think through their internal goals and against those user tasks. A lot of times they're not as used to thinking about things from a user perspective. So giving them a place to do that, a box to fill, and then also the context of the page. You can use analytics to give them some ideas about what those inward paths would be. A lot of times they might not think, they think the home page is important and then they'll see my page, but they don't necessarily think someone might have Googled this and showed up with no context, or they might not know who we are or what any of these jargon words or abbreviations are. So just giving them that sort of inkling in the beginning can help. And then forward paths about just always giving a place to send people, those calls to action, and thinking about the position in the larger site flow of the page. Filling in all of those things before you get to that core content, which is kind of like that WYSIWYG box with the blinking cursor in it. So really just giving them all these things that are invisible when they're working on a page and then kind of floating around in the background and writing it down, giving them a box to put into it and helping them think through it. We help them do this in groups of 2 to 3. It usually helps. And then once we have those page goals and context that are planned out for just the key site pages, not like, again, it'd take lifetimes to go through all of them. But so working through those individual pages to get them from their current site content or their ideal content into an effective user experience in the new design system format. So this is where we start thinking about those patterns. Now, this is not just, like I said about the other one, this activity also is not just for writers or designers that will be doing the layout. This is the tangible act of cutting things up and deciding what goes into which pattern and being able to move those pieces independently around the page. It really helps stakeholders see and understand the relationships between chunks of content and visualize how that new system is going to be modular, which they're not used to thinking of content that way. So it also helps them understand the ways that existing content needs to change. So it can help give you a little bit of a break as the person who might have to change a word or a headline here or there when they're thinking about, when they can see it themselves and see what that act of doing this, what this is like as a process. So we have another exercise that we do, and there's a link to these, a description of these exercises at the end of these slides so that you can go and see them. There's a couple of pages on our site we posted just to share what we do, so you can use them as well with your teams. But this is an exercise we do, again, with content production teams as well as just subject matter experts. These are, there's an associate dean in this photo and a couple of kind of higher level faculty members who don't usually have to think about the details. We've done this with libraries that are already designed, pattern libraries that are complete designs where we cut up the design comps, as well as just blank wireframes of common information design patterns like lists and tables and routing blocks and feature boxes and stuff like that. So either of them works. It's just a matter of what is yours and what level of fidelity are you working with at this part of the design process. So it works either way. Again, we do groups of 2 or 3. And they can do different pages or different versions of the same page. So everybody can do the admission page, and then you can compare groups of students versus faculty. That one's always exciting to see how different people will do different pieces of the same content, or you can have them do different pages. For time's sake, we end up doing that a lot. But you just give everybody the pieces and that they'll have to choose from when they're building a page, or when someone is building a page in the CMS, and then just let them cut them apart. We've tried cutting them out in advance. That takes a lot of time that you don't need to spend. So multiple people can do quick work of cutting. So just give them the scissors and some tape and let them rearrange everything. They can write the placeholder copy in the notes. If they take that page, the core model exercise, if they did this one as well on the same page, they can use this as a reference, which is really helpful. We often combine these 2 exercises when we're working on these key pages for these things. So they can take that content and just write it in there, cut it up. It doesn't have to be real, but they can put in little words, that says this is what this thing is going to be, and then start to think about that in terms of page priorities and just design sort of a scrollable prototype of a web page. And you can even use paper prototypes of a web page to test on. You can test those with users, see if they're doing the jobs that you expect. Now, because paper and in-person workshops aren't really an option right now, we worked with a group earlier. This is for the Emory School of Medicine group that we worked with earlier this year, in the last couple of months, to do. This is their pattern library that we divided into purposes on a Miro board. So we use Miro as a tool. It's just like a whiteboarding tool where we kind of chopped up their pieces into an idea of, which types you would use for which things. And then we said, okay, you can take your page that you've been thinking about, your current page. You can take the plan for the new page and that core model template that you've thought through. And now you can just copy these things and drag them over to the bottom part, and then you can still move things around. So this format is nice. It lets people collaborate remotely, but we do like the paper format for collaboration. It brings out some conversations when you put people in groups of 2 and 3, and it's more of an impermanent feeling, so people aren't like tweaking and trying to get things like perfectly lined up and trying to fix the copy in them as much as if it's for some reason sketching out in like sticky notes and pieces of paper is a little bit more sketchy, like when we're doing the design process. But the biggest thing is just to get people starting to think in those chunks and practice mapping those with what's possible in the CMS, which is really the goal of all those exercises. So after you thought through those key pages with your stakeholders and you've helped them see how those things are going to change and that what you're doing, that this is a real job that takes some skill and some experience, and maybe they should let you change a few words every once in a while, then you can use some of that new goodwill that you've built up and develop some standards. So you might already have editorial style and branding standards, but really we find that most of the places that people need to add are those usage guidelines for those new components. So after you've got a little bit of time working through the components with different people from different parts of the institution, you can really start to get a good idea of what pieces people want to use and how. Maybe something needs to be adapted. When we were working with Emory, one of their they had a routing block that had bright colors. I think it's on here. Yeah, the left side, these routing blocks down at the bottom, they have all these purple and orange and green and blue colors, and people didn't have a lot of images, and so they were trying to use those across the site in places that didn't necessarily need routing or didn't necessarily need to be that bright. So just getting an idea of how people are starting to use things and then giving them guidelines and some guardrails. And you can do that in the CMS too with workflows and permissions and WordPress and things. And then the last thing is the training component. It's a big, content work is about people. It can be political. And remembering that it's not just about the tool training in the CMS, but it's a cultural and it's an organizational change, and that's going to take some time. So really that top one is the most important one, is the building relationships, those getting people around the table, around their content, and then helping them think through. This is really a kind of a brain shift that they need to make from thinking of things the way that they, in a desktop publishing style, to that just chunking things up into interactive components. So how do you get good at doing that? Is you practice. So giving people a chance to practice and giving them the frame of mind to start thinking about things. And then the flexibility that's offered by a pattern library format, it really comes with that set of new skill requirements and a responsibility to the user to get that right on the website. And so it's going to take a big shift that's not, that's kind of hidden, and it's like that iceberg under the ocean. So that transition, it tends to take people some time and some commitment, but we've been working with people and we found that they do, it is possible to get everybody on board. It's just, it's going to make a better site for everybody. It just takes a little bit of planning and expectation management to do that. So those are all my slides. These will be posted on the this talks page on the website, on the schedule. There's a link to the slides on there, and they're on SlideShare. And then these are links that you can get to some of those examples of the examples on our site for New City site for the exercises that we mentioned, but also I mentioned paper prototyping and UIE engineering, usability engineering has a good paper prototyping seminar there too, if you're interested in that. And that's all that I have, except for questions.
We do have a few questions that came in. We have about 5 minutes left, which is great. Someone asked, do you or did you use analytics to define key pages and help define goals for both internal and user?
Yes, we often use analytics to, a lot of times it's going to be the ones but yes, we do, especially for those ones I was talking about, like a financial aid or something that faculty members might not be super excited about, that don't work with that section. But yes, so analytics can help you identify those. It tells you the what of what's happening, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the why. So sometimes students are searching for a page, and you can use search logs to identify, find what terms they're searching for, and say, wow, 40% of our searches are around this one housing form. So maybe we need to think about the housing page or something like that. So it's different in every website, but yes, analytics help us kind of bring those ideas to the top. And sometimes the page that is an analytics with, the highest page views isn't necessarily the one that people are looking for, though, too. So you have to keep that in mind, that whatever the analytics tells you, it's just the what, it's not the why. So you might need to think about how to craft that journey and how to intentionally drive your traffic through a set of pages, especially if it's going to change, if you're changing up your information architecture. But yes, that's definitely, and we like to do that to give that information, just a brief overview of that information to people during those exercises too, when they're thinking about, okay, how do people get to this page? What do they know when they got here? Did they come from that section of the site, or did they come from Google? Did they come from our site search? That sort of thing.
Cool. Another individual asked, do you implement A/B testing on critical elements, parentheses, certain pages, for example, home, contact, etc.?
Yes, we definitely do A/B testing. A lot of times we will do it with a particular, sometimes we do it to settle sites, which can be really helpful. It's not as much, usually like an e-commerce site might do A/B testing to decide, should this button be blue or should it be red? Whereas a university, a lot of times the design system is a little bit more rigid. So they're not, they have, this is what the button style always looks like, but what are those words? What does that text on the button need to be? So a lot of times we'll do text for navigational elements. So it can be calls to action, but it's also, we've done them for navigation. We had a group that was launching a campaign website, a comprehensive campaign. And they wanted to name the button after the branded name of the campaign. So it had, they all have a name now and like a logo. So they wanted that to be the button, but users weren't quite getting the idea. So they wanted to add, donate to the campaign on there, but then it didn't match the other navigation items. So we did some work with them to figure out, do the navigation items need to be verbs? Can they be nouns? Do people get what goes under there? So then we can do like a tree test to decide, we ask people what do you think goes under here, or where would you expect something like this to show? And then they can tell you, they'll go through and say, I would click on this to find that. And so, yes, A/B testing is helpful. Tree testing can be helpful. But a lot of times it is more about the words and the patterns in a university site, just because of that brandedness of the design system.
Cool. We have one more question that came in. They said, at our school, we are working through a migration from an older CMS to WordPress. In the early part of the process, we chose to build our page templates using Atomic Design and selected Pattern Lab as a platform in which we build Twig templates for WordPress. Are you and your team using a platform to help build out your templates for the designs that you create?
Yes, we do exactly what you just said. So that we think you're on a great start. Yeah. So we were working in Pattern Lab. I think we might have a couple of projects that are still active in Pattern Lab, in addition to the ones that we do maintenance on. That's the Brad Frost one. So that was the original. Right now we've moved to Fractal. Our developers could tell you a lot more about reasons, but we liked, one of the things that I know that we liked more about Fractal instead of Pattern Lab was its ability to, I could organize that, and so we could kind of combine that pattern library site that it makes with some style guide things. So we can put some of those usage guidelines for how do we put that. Both of those places will do it, but the Fractal one let us add some like front matter type things for like writing guidelines, and here's your a link to your editorial and your branding style, and here's some accessibility guidelines that you need to know. So we had more spaces for those general things, and we could control the organization of those a little better. So Pattern Lab, I haven't worked with that one in a few months, so it might be working on that sort of thing too. But that's one reason. Yes, we do use Fractal, Pattern Lab, and then we use Twig. In addition to, our developers would love to tell you all about the workflow. I don't know as much about it as they do.
Awesome. Well, with that said, we are perfect timing, which is great. Thank you, Rachel.